You know, there's something peculiar that happens after someone goes through genuine spiritual awakening. Something that would sound almost rude or antisocial if you didn't understand what was really happening beneath the surface. They stop wanting visitors. They stop inviting people over. They stop being available for the casual drop-ins and social calls that used to be part of normal life. And people notice this, of course. They notice. Friends feel rejected. Family members feel hurt. Acquaintances interpret it as arrogance or depression or some kind of spiritual superiority complex. But what if I told you that this withdrawal from casual social contact has nothing to do with superiority or rudeness or misanthropy? What if this reluctance to have visitors is actually a profound form of self-preservation, a necessary protection of something precious that took years or decades to develop and can be destroyed in an afternoon by unconscious energy invading your space? If you've experienced this shift yourself, if you've found yourself becoming increasingly protective of your personal space and wondering if something is wrong with you, please give this video a thumbs up and share your experience in the comments below. And if you want to understand the deeper dynamics of spiritual awakening, subscribe to this channel. Now, to understand why awakened people become so protective of their space, you first need to understand what happens energetically during and after awakening. When you wake up spiritually, when consciousness shifts from being completely identified with thoughts and emotion and the separate self to recognizing the spacious awareness underlying all of that, something fundamental changes in your entire system. You become extraordinarily sensitive. Your nervous system, which used to be buffered by layers of unconsciousness and social conditioning and psychological defense mechanism, suddenly becomes far more permeable, far more receptive, far more aware of subtle energies that you never noticed before. And this sensitivity is not a weakness. It's actually a sign of increasing consciousness. But it means that what used to feel neutral or mildly annoying now feels absolutely intolerable. The first reason awakened people don't like visitors is that most people bring chaos disguised as conversation. When someone who's still deeply asleep, still completely identified with their thinking mind and their emotional drama, enters your space, they don't just bring their physical body. They bring an entire energetic field of unconsciousness. They bring their anxiety, their resentment, their endless mental chatter, their unprocessed emotion, their judgments, their projection, their need for validation and attention. And all of this pours into your space like smoke filling a room. Before awakening, you wouldn't have noticed this because you were carrying the same kind of chaos yourself. But after awakening, after you've spent months or years carefully cultivating inner silence and spaciousness and peace, having someone fill your sanctuary with unconscious energy feels like someone tracking mud through a space you've spent days cleaning. It's not that you judge them for being unconscious. It's that you can no longer tolerate what their unconsciousness does to your carefully maintained inner state. Think about what happens during a typical visit from someone who's still asleep. They walk in and immediately start talking, not because they have anything important to say, but because silence makes them uncomfortable. They fill the air with complaint about work, gossip about mutual acquaintances, opinions about politics or celebrities or whatever drama is currently occupying the collective consciousness. They're not present with you at all. They're lost in their mind, using you as a sounding board for their internal chaos. And if you're awake, you can see this clearly. You can see that they're not really here, not really connecting, not really meeting you. They're just using your space as a dumping ground for whatever they need to discharge from their system. And after they leave, you feel depleted, contaminated, disturbed. The peace you'd cultivated is gone. The clarity you'd developed is clouded. The spaciousness you'd created is collapsed. And it takes hours or days to restore what was destroyed in one afternoon of unconscious visiting. I knew someone who described having a family member visit after she'd been in a deep period of solitary practice. This family member was lovely in many ways, well-meaning, caring, but completely unconscious, completely identified with her drama and opinions and endless commentary about everything and nothing. Within 20 minutes of arriving, she had commented on the furniture arrangement, criticized several of the host's life choices disguised as concern, complained about 3 different people who weren't present, and filled the entire space with anxious energy about things that might happen in the future but hadn't happened yet. And the awakened person sat there watching this invasion of chaos into her carefully maintained sanctuary, and she realized with absolute clarity why monks live in monastery, why hermits live in cave, why every genuine spiritual tradition has some form of retreat or withdrawal built into. Not because spiritual people hate humanity, but because consciousness requires protection from unconsciousness, the way a candle flame requires protection from wind. The second reason awakened people don't like visitors is that most social interactions require performance, and they can no longer perform. Before awakening, you had various personas you would deploy depending on who was visiting: the good daughter, the fun friend, the successful professional, the helpful neighbor. These weren't conscious manipulation, they were simply the social masks everyone wears to navigate different relationship and situation. But after awakening, these masks become impossible to maintain. Your authentic self has emerged, and it cannot pretend, it cannot perform, it cannot put on a show for visitors who expect you to be the version of you they're comfortable with. When visitors come, they have expectation, often unconscious expectation, about who you'll be and how you'll behave and what role you'll play in their drama. They want the old you, the sleeping you, the version that would participate in gossip or agree with their complaint, or validate their worldview, or laugh at jokes that aren't funny, or pretend interest in topics that are meaningless. But the awakened person cannot do this anymore, not because they're trying to be difficult or spiritual or superior, but because something fundamental has shifted. The false self has dissolved or is dissolving, and all that remains is what's authentic. An authentic presence doesn't perform, it doesn't pretend, it doesn't adjust itself to make others comfortable, it simply is what it is. And this makes visitors deeply uncomfortable because they can no longer get from you what they unconsciously came for, which was reinforcement of their own unconsciousness, validation of their drama, participation in their familiar pattern. You've become a mirror that reflects what they don't want to see, and they don't like. They'll say you've become cold, or distant, or weird, or too serious. But what's really happening is that you've stopped performing, and they miss the show. The third reason is that awakened people have discovered something in solitude that they never found in company, and they're not willing to trade it for the pale substitute of unconscious socializing. In silence, in stillness, in solitude, the awakened person has discovered presence itself, the living reality of consciousness, the extraordinary aliveness of simply being without doing anything or being anyone. They've tasted a quality of peace and fullness that doesn't depend on external stimulation or validation or entertainment. They've found that being alone is not lonely. It's actually the end of loneliness, because loneliness is what you feel when you're surrounded by people who don't see, who are relating to their idea of you rather than your actual presence. But in true solitude, there's nothing to perform for, nothing to maintain, nothing to defend. You can simply be. And this being, this pure presence, is so rich, so nourishing, so fundamentally satisfying that most social interaction feels shallow and depleting by comparison. Think about what most social visits actually offer: surface conversation about surface topics, shared distraction through entertainment or food or drink, mutual validation of ego structures, perhaps some genuine moments of connection, but often these are buried under hours of unconscious chatter and performance. Compare this to what's available in conscious solitude: direct contact with reality, unfiltered by the social mind, access to creativity and insight and clarity that only emerges in silence, the deep rest of not having to be anyone or do anything or maintain any image, the extraordinary aliveness of pure awareness meeting the present moment without distraction. attraction. Once you've tasted this, once you've discovered what's available in true aloneness, most social interaction feels like being asked to trade gold for copper. Why would you do it? And so you become increasingly selective, increasingly protective of your solitude, increasingly reluctant to sacrifice the gold of conscious presence for the copper of unconscious socializing. The fourth reason awakened people don't like visitors is that their space has become sacred, and they can feel when that sacredness is violated. This might sound strange to people who've never experienced it, but after deep spiritual work, your living space becomes more than just a physical location. It becomes a sanctuary, a temple, a carefully maintained energetic field that supports your consciousness. You've spent hours in meditation in that space. You've cried and healed and integrated shadow material in that space. You've had profound insight and mystical experiences in that space. The space itself holds a certain quality of consciousness now, a certain vibration, a certain peace, and you can feel it the moment you enter. This quality of spaciousness and stillness and clarity that you've cultivated over time. When unconscious visitors enter this space, they don't just ignore the sacredness, they actively disturb it. They bring noise where there was silence. They bring chaos where there was order. They bring anxiety where there was peace. And they're completely unaware they're doing this because they can't perceive the subtle, energetic dimensions of reality that the awakened person is now exquisitely sensitive to. It's like someone with muddy boots walking through a meditation hall. They don't see what they're trampling because they're not looking at that level. But you see it, you feel it, and it's disturbing in a way that's difficult to explain to someone who doesn't have the sensitivity to perceive. So you stop inviting people in, not all people, but most people. You become fiercely protective of your sanctuary because you understand now that space matters, that environment matters, that the energetic field you live in directly affects your consciousness, and you're no longer willing to sacrifice that for the sake of appearing normal or social or welcoming according to conventional standards. The fifth reason is that awakened people have realized that most visits are transaction, not connections, and they're no longer interested in transaction. Before awakening, you probably didn't notice that most social interaction is actually subtle transaction. I'll listen to your problems if you listen to mine. I'll validate your worldview if you validate mine. I'll make you feel good about yourself if you make me feel good about myself. I'll provide entertainment or food or drink, and in exchange, you'll provide company or conversation or the feeling that I'm a good host or friend or family member. These transactions are rarely conscious or acknowledged, but they're there, operating beneath every interaction. But after awakening, you see these transactions clearly, and you find them exhausting and unfulfilling, because what you're hungry for now is not transaction, but genuine connection. Consciousness meeting consciousness, authentic presence meeting authentic presence without agenda or performance or need. And this kind of connection is extraordinarily rare. Most people are not capable of it because they're still operating entirely from ego, from need, from unconscious pattern. They cannot meet you in presence because they're not present themselves. They're lost in their mind, in their story, in their endless seeking for something outside themselves to make them feel complete. So visits become exhausting exercises in managing other people's unconscious need while pretending you're enjoying their company. The awakened person eventually says no to this, not because they don't care about people, but because they care more about truth than about maintaining comfortable fiction. They'd rather be alone than pretend to be connected. They'd rather have no visitors than visitors who cannot actually meet them in present. The sixth reason awakened people don't like visitors is that they're doing work that visitors interrupt, and this work is more important than socializing. The work of integration, of shadow work, of continually deepening into consciousness. This is not casual hobby that you do when you feel like. This is the central task of an awakened life. You're dismantling decades of conditioning, integrating repressed material, rewiring your entire nervous system, developing capacities of awareness and presence that take immense dedication and consistency to cultivate. And this work requires extended periods of uninterrupted solitude, not occasional moments of quiet, but days and weeks, and sometimes months, of minimal external stimulation and social interaction. When visitors show up, they interrupt this process. Even well-meaning visitors, even brief visits, create disruption that can set back work that took weeks to develop. Your consciousness is like a pool of water. In stillness, it becomes clear, and you can see all the way to the bottom. But even a small stone thrown in creates ripples that cloud everything. Visitors are stone. They create ripple. And if you're serious about your work, if you understand that spiritual development is not a weekend hobby, but the most important thing you can possibly be doing with your limited time on this planet, then you become very, very protective of the conditions required for that work. And one of those conditions is extensive solitude, freedom from the constant interruption of unconscious social demand. So what does this actually look like in practice? Does the awakened person become a complete hermit who never sees anyone? Not necessarily, though for some that is the path. What typically happens is that the awakened person becomes extraordinarily selective. They stop being available for casual visit, drop-in guests, social obligations they feel nothing for. They stop pretending to enjoy gatherings they find depleting. They stop maintaining relationships that are based on transaction rather than genuine connection. But they remain deeply available for the few people who can actually meet them in consciousness, who understand what sacred space means, who know how to be present rather than just filling air with noise. These rare individuals are welcomed, cherished, honored, because consciousness recognizes consciousness and genuine meeting is possible. They also become very clear about boundary, about protecting their space and time and energy. They might have specific times when they're available for visitors and other times that are absolutely protected for their practice and work. They might have particular requirements about how visits happen, that phones are off, that there's space for silence, that unconscious chatter isn't expected or encouraged. And people who are still asleep often find these boundaries offensive or strange or too strict. But the awakened person no longer cares about appearing normal or accommodating according to conventional social standards. They care about protecting what's precious, maintaining their consciousness, continuing their development. And if that makes them seem antisocial or strange or difficult to unconscious people, so be it. Here's what you need to understand if you're going through this yourself. If you're finding yourself increasingly reluctant to have visitors and wondering if something is wrong with you, nothing is wrong with you. You're not becoming antisocial or depressed or isolated in an unhealthy way. You're simply becoming conscious of what most people never notice, which is that unconscious energy is toxic to consciousness, that most social interaction depletes rather than nourishes, that your space and your solitude are precious beyond measure and must be protected. You're learning to honor your own need rather than sacrificing yourself on the altar of social obligation and other people's expectation. You're discovering that it's better to be authentically alone than inauthentically connected. Better to have empty space than space filled with unconscious chaos. And here's the beautiful thing that often happens once you truly honor this. Once you stop forcing yourself to be available for visitors you don't want. Once you protect your sanctuary with fierce dedication, the right people start appearing. Not the old friends who want the old you. Not the family members who need you to play familiar role. Not the acquaintances who want to fill their emptiness with your energy. But the rare, precious souls who are also awake or awakening, who understand sacred space, who know how to be present, who can meet you in consciousness rather than just using you as a mirror for their unconsciousness. These people feel like coming home. These visits nourish rather than deplete. These connections honor rather than violate the sacredness you've cultivated. So, if you're the awakened person reading this, give yourself permission to be fiercely protective of your space, your time, your energy, your sanctuary. You don't owe anyone access to you just because they want it, or because social convention says you should be more welcoming, or because they'll be hurt if you say no. Your first responsibility is to your own consciousness, to protecting what you've worked so hard to develop, to maintaining the conditions required for your continued awakening. Let people think what they want to think. Let them call you antisocial or strange or too serious. You know what you're protecting and why it matters. And that's enough. And if you're the person who wants to visit someone who's awakened and finds them no longer as available as they used to be, understand what's really happening. They haven't rejected you personally. They've simply outgrown a way of being that includes constant availability for unconscious socializing. If you want genuine connection with them, learn to be present. Learn to meet them in consciousness rather than filling space with chatter. Honor their space as sacred. Understand that silence is not awkward but nourishing, and you might find yourself welcome into something far more meaningful than the shallow socializing you've been accustomed. Or you might find that you're not yet ready for that kind of meeting, and that's okay too. Not everyone is meant to walk together on this path. The spiritually awake don't dislike visitors because they dislike people. They're selective about visitors because they've discovered something infinitely precious that most visitors inadvertently destroy simply by being unconscious. And they've decided finally that protecting consciousness is more important than appearing normal. That honoring what's sacred is more important than meeting social expectation. That being authentically alone is better than being inauthentically connected. This is not misanthropy. This is wisdom. This is the natural development of awakening consciousness, learning to protect itself in a world that largely remains asleep. And there is nothing wrong with it whatsoever.